Ahoy! If you would like to learn how to play Ishtar, you have come to the right place. Ishtar is not easy to play and takes quite a fair bit of practice, but it's worth it for her unique playstyle. She is best described as a varied range hunter. She is very strong at close range, and she's also very strong at very long range combat, whereas the mid-range is not her strongest suit compared to the others. She also has extremely strong clear throughout the entire game, and she is difficult to play due to the basic attack modifiers that you constantly have to switch between. She has a lot of sporadic crowd control. This means she has a lot of crowd control in her abilities, but a lot of it is short and not always guaranteed. While her kit only has one straightforward combo, there are many ways for her to approach a fight due to her unique basic attack modifier. Overall, Ishtar's playstyle is probably best described as hybrid. She uses her abilities a lot, but a lot of her damage still comes from her basic attacks, and her abilities also utilize her basic attack. So while at first glance her kit may look similar to Medusa, she actually plays quite differently. Now let's look at Ishtar's abilities, starting with her passive Mark of Vengeance. When she is hit by an enemy guard and she is or ends up below 75% health, the enemy guard is marked, and you can see the mark right here. Now every basic attack will increase the attack speed that Ishtar has. This is up to 4 stacks, and each attack increases the attack speed by 5%. So this is a very nice way to get a little bit of an edge in a trade with other hunters. But not only that, if you end up killing the mark target, then you get a 20% movement speed boost for 5 seconds. The individual attack speed buff stacks only last for 4 seconds. Now when talking about her abilities, we will skip the first ability, Imbue arrows, for now, because it's by far the most complex one. We'll spend a lot of time on it later. We will first talk about the simpler ones, and her second ability is Rolling Thunder. This has a 15 seconds cooldown, and you can see the targeter here. Each of these is its own circle that damages enemies. So in the most simple way, this would be a single hit of the ability. However, what makes this ability unique is that you can target it either from the front, so it comes out from you, as I just did there, or you can make it come out from the enemy, or from far away basically. So in this case, the projectiles would come towards you. Now this ability has an additional mechanic, and that is the overlap, which you can see here. When two of these circles overlap, which is quite easy to do, to be honest, then the target within this overlap will take damage twice from each individual circle and will get mezzed by the second hit. This mess is only 0.75 seconds, so don't expect anything massive here. This is not a big control ability, but it's a quick disruption in a fight basically. Now Rolling Thunder is not a particularly high damage ability. An individual shot will deal between 40 to 120 damage, and even if you hit 2 shots, it's less damage than a lot of other high damage abilities that other hunters have. It is mostly a zoning tool, and its strength lies in the fact that it can be used for both clearing and for poking, and that you can choose where it targets the enemy from, so you can kind of create pressure on whichever terms you choose. I would also only look at it as a secondary clearing tool after Imbue arrows. I would highly recommend putting this ability on instant casting. You don't really need to see the targeter, because if you have the ruler enabled, it is exactly the entire range of the ruler. It goes up to 70 units. And that way the ability will come out much quicker, which especially in a boxing match feels very crucial. For some reason this ability feels very weirdly delayed when using quick cast. Ishtar's third ability is Jolt, which in its purest form is a simple dash with a 15 seconds cooldown. However, this dash gets a variety of extra effects when connecting with an enemy. You will not only deal damage to them, but also bounce off them and then hit them with an additional shot. You see 3 instances of damage here if you look closely, which is because there is an aspect of bonus damage and also 110% of your basic attack damage, which are both counted separately for some reason when shooting this ability. And you can also see right there that this ability can actually crit, and both of these secondary parts have a chance to crit separately from each other. Charging at an enemy also roots them in place. So your secondary shot is auto-confirmed, and as it is a bit of an AoE projectile, you can see that you can actually hit multiple enemies with it if they're close to each other. What's important is that you cannot control the return angle of the leap at all. This is a true leap. For example, a Willish can pull you out of this leap, but it doesn't get influenced by where you're aiming the camera. The only thing that you can influence by re-aiming the camera is that you basically already turn in the direction that you want to walk afterwards, but you'll always go back exactly in the direction that you are dashing at the enemy. And even if you get really close to the enemy and dash immediately, the distance that you jump at ends up being the same anyways. A little bonus tip for the 3, it allows you to jump backwards over player-made walls. So for example, if you're caged by an Odin, then you can get out of his wall with the jump part of the 3, as long as you dash into him. Much like with Rolling Thunder, I would recommend putting this ability on instant cast. You can actually see the range by just looking at your ruler as well, because the dash range is exactly the 55 units targeter. A word of caution, you're currently, for some reason, not entirely able to avoid all damage while you're in the leap. So at some point, sometimes it doesn't seem to register as a leap. I couldn't recreate this in jungle practice, but in-game, apparently people have been hit by Fenrir Brutalize while jumping back. I have been hit by Freya basic attacks while I was already pretty high in the air. So something about it makes it not an immediate leap, and there is always a chance that you can actually still die while using the leap part of this ability. Ishtar's ultimate is Blades of Retribution. This throws a bunch of projectiles in a cone in front of you, and these then linger for a while, and upon activation can return to you and will stun enemies for 1 second if they have been hit by both projectiles. The initial part of the attack will also cripple, and as you can see, if you're close to an enemy, you will be able to hit them with more of the projectiles. If you hit them with more projectiles, there's a reduction that kicks in, so you won't deal full damage with all of them, but they will still deal a reasonable amount of damage. Under completely perfect circumstances, if you hit all projectiles on the way out and on the way in, and you have maxed out stats on everything, you could technically deal 800 base damage and 225% scaling with this ability to a single target. Unlikely to actually happen, but there is a combo that we get to later that makes a bigger portion of this much easier to guarantee. But keep in mind that while this appears to be a damaging ability, it is also in many ways a control ability. Not only do you have the 1.25 seconds cripple and the 1 second stun, but you also have control over when this will happen, or when the secondary part will happen, since you have the 3-second window to choose a return point. You can literally choose to return the projectiles instantly, or you can wait out the entire duration, and that can heavily influence the impact on a team fight. The ultimate also provides you with CC immunity for the wind-up, and the wind-up is relatively long. This is important to keep in mind, especially when boxing 1v1. Look at the delay between my basic attack and the next basic attack if I use the ultimate in between. This is quite a long window without any basic attacks, and in some situations you may actually be able to, on a single target, get more damage off by just keeping on using basic attacks instead of using your ultimate, depending on the exact circumstances, how far away they are, and how many projectiles you can confirm on them. So in a boxing scenario, it can be worth holding onto the ultimate until you want to use it for CC immunity, or you want to use it to prevent an enemy from using an escape. Now we can talk about the strongest and most complex part of her kit, which is her 1, Imbue arrows. This is essentially an option of 3 different basic attack modifiers that you can toggle by pressing the button for the first ability once. With its 9 seconds cooldown, this is something you will use very frequently, often even multiple times on the same wave. Now, the first option that you have here is this lobbed shot. This makes you launch a projectile into the air that deals AoE damage, and each of these steroids is always going to be active for 5 seconds. So the more attack speed you have, the more of these amplified shots you get. Now this is very, very crucial for lane clear. If we go to level 1 here with a starting build, then you can see even at this point, I can almost clear the archers entirely just by using a fully charged barrage of the 1. And very quickly get to the point where you can clear out the archers, and eventually throughout the match you get to the point where you can clear out both the archers and the melee minions with a single charge of the first version of Imbue arrows. Now, Strike Shot, as it's called, comes with other benefits too. It gets a little bit of bonus damage, up to 30, and it also comes with a bit of a downside, that is the crit damage from the attacks being reduced by 40%. However, something that is less known is that it actually extends your basic attack range. While the range is labeled as 47, it is actually longer than a normal basic attack because that's just the center point. This is basically where the max range for a basic attack would end here. This is where we can confirm it. And if we go back now, this is where I can't hit a basic attack anymore. But if I activate the first version, the Strike Shot, I can still hit the target because I have that extended range. So with the radius being 10 units, it seems like you can actually reach up to 57 range with this attack form. The last thing that is noteworthy about Strike Shot is that you can also shoot across the wall without having any vision of the target. So between that and the increased range, this actually has more combat utility even in trades than you would expect, but you have to get used to the different projectiles. So it's something that I would not prefer in most trades over the other two options unless specific circumstances such as enemies over walls or at the perfect distance call for it. Also, if you hit multiple targets with it, you will get multiple procs on items like Death Toll or like Mannequin's Scepter. The second basic attack enhancement version is Spread Shot and does exactly what the name says. It spreads out your shots. Your middle shot will deal normal damage. The side shots deal reduced damage starting at 5% and scaling up to 10% when leveling the ability. In other words, if you're really close to an enemy, you can deal 150% weapon damage if all projectiles connect. Also, even though the side projectiles do not proc item effects, they can crit. I don't know if that is intended, but it's definitely strong. I'd like to thank KD for pointing this out to me, because after some experimenting with it, I figured that Ishtar can actually solo a level 30 fire giant very, very easily compared to other guards because of the extra damage that you get from the spread shot crits if you have the right build for it. Keep in mind that this is something that may get fixed or nerfed in the future, but for now it's an extremely strong component of her kit. This also makes it her best boxing version of the ability by far if you are trading around mid-range, which makes it a bit unfortunate that it's bound to the second key, which I feel like feels a bit janky. I personally found that getting in the habit of using this specifically for boxing was probably one of the hardest parts to get used to. But there's also the third version, which is Storm Shot. This one increases your basic attack range significantly. I think it's around 80 units. It also increases your attack speed by up to 40% depending on the rank, and it increases your projectile speed to 120%, so a 20% increase over the normal projectile speed. In return, it also reduces your projectile damage by 20%, but that's a very worthwhile trade-off. The purpose behind this is obvious: poke from a safe distance, or use it to finish off an enemy that is trying to get away and is too far away for anything else. And again, it is worth noting that this is not depending on the amount of shots or anything, so the more attack speed you have, the more shots you can fire at this long range within those 5 seconds. Now let's talk about leveling order. I put a point into Imbue arrows on level 1, simply because it allows you to use the first version of it that, in my opinion, is the most reliable early clear and has a relatively short cooldown, so you can use it more frequently than, for example, Rolling Thunder. On level 2, I usually put a point into Jolt, so I have a point in my escape. And then on level 3, I will start putting points into Rolling Thunder. Now, Rolling Thunder only increases its damage by 20 per rank, but if you hit both hits, that's 40 extra damage. And in my opinion, this is what feels best to maximize first. This is because while the 1 actually gets a lot of additional benefits, the clearing increase on the 1, if you're using the first version of it to clear, isn't all that much. As you can see, if you look at the ability, the damage increase per shot is only 4 bonus damage, and I would say that's not really enough to be worth putting points into it for clear specifically, which is what you're looking for early on. So what I've found works best is focusing on Rolling Thunder first. But then, when you have the option to, you of course want to put a point into the ultimate. After that, I would just continue maxing Rolling Thunder as much as possible, and eventually you get to a point where you have to decide what you want to max next. I personally do think that you can put points into the ultimate if you want to rely on that combo, but that depends a lot on how well your enemies are counterplaying it. And otherwise I would point points into the 1. Leveling the 3, as you can see, actually increases the charge damage a fair bit and the arrow bonus damage as well, so it's actually 50 base damage, but that all pales in comparison to the basic attack damage that the effect itself has, and that's where the main draw of damage comes from, which is entirely unaffected by leveling this ability, whereas the 1 gets various other benefits, and especially attack speed steroid on the 3rd version, in my opinion, is more important. Now when it comes to combos, Ishtar only has one really important combo. She has additional other small combos just by setting up things with her 2, but the really big deal is the combination of her ultimate and her 3, which looks as follows. As you can see, all of the projectiles return onto your target and not to yourself as they normally would. What causes this is that while you're in the air, while you're in the leap, the projectiles from the ult cannot target you and will instead target your last location, or the last location where you were on the ground. And that last location happens to be exactly where the enemy that you locked in place with your dash is currently standing. So this is a very bread and butter combo for her in order to confirm a lot of hits of the ultimate on a target. And it pretty much works from anywhere. I could just shoot this projectiles over here, then go over here, dash, and it will still work the same way. So I don't even have to face correctly or anything. The problem with this combo is that the moment you go into an actual game and ping comes into play, it gets a lot less reliable and there will be a lot more situations where the projectiles still return to you anyways. You want to make sure that when you use the ultimate and then you start dashing, you immediately hit the ult as much as possible so that the projectiles come back as quickly as possible in order to hopefully secure this combo. It's still not 100% reliable, but it should be working most of the time. Now, what is worth keeping in mind is when you do that, it also gives the enemy a very easy out, because at that point, they can counter both the CC from your 3 and from your ultimate just by using beats, and they can just walk away. At that point, you've burned half your kit, and you'll still get some poke damage on them from the 3, and maybe from the follow-up projectile because it has a larger radius, but you're gonna miss a lot of the projectiles from the ultimate and not deal that much damage with them. And in a trade, being countered like that can be extremely painful. And the same thing is also true for a well-timed Aegis. If you drop an Aegis in that moment, you avoid both the shot damage from the 3 as well as the damage from the returning projectiles. So while this is a very satisfying combo to confirm, it's not one that I would always recommend using because you're basically playing all of your cards at once. Sometimes that may be good because it's exactly the surprise damage that you need. In other situations, you may be better off spacing out the damage, or maybe even baiting and not using both parts together. That could be used, for example, to try and make the Aegis run out before you return the projectiles within the 1.5 seconds. It is going to be very difficult with beats because people will usually beat after you have started the combo with a 3. Now let's talk about items. In terms of starters, I think she is very, very flexible and you can basically go with whichever starter you like the most. I personally love Mannequin Scepter on her in less conventional roles, in middle for example, or in jungle. If you want to play her there, I think Mannequin is fantastic because you get this burning proc on every target in the AoE. You can also use it in duo if you want to go for a Hidden Blade build, but generally, if you want to opt for more traditional ones, then you're probably between Leather Cowl and Death Toll. I like Death Toll a little bit better because it gives you decent sustain and you're not really reliant on lifesteal, and also, again, the AoE proc works for this, so in my opinion it feels pretty good for that. But again, this is preference, this depends on which upgrade you want to get to eventually. The first full item that I would recommend is Transcendence. She has okay ability damage early, she doesn't have the most insane one, but especially having the reduced cooldown on the first ability is very strong, and you just want to have hard-hitting basic attacks, so when you do your combos, you want to have some power behind that in every form, both for the ability part and the basic attack. After that, I would go for Atalanta's Bow, which I think is just generally a very strong item. It'll give you a bit of everything, and it'll especially give you crit chance as well. And I believe in her current form, while she is an ability-based hunter to some degree, she very much works very, very well with crit. You have very long-range basic attacks that can crit, you have the split projectiles that can all crit individually and proc crit effects as well. And you also have the projectile part of her 3 that can crit. So half of her kit can basically crit in addition to her basic attacks themselves. And to further play into that, I would build a Wind Demon for even more crit chance. At this point I can also demonstrate, just getting a split shot off here will activate the Wind Demon passive. So the same is obviously true for Deathbringer as well, if you're going for the Envenomed version. So that is an item that I feel like should be in any crit build anyways, but you want to have some pen as well. So in some situations you may be able to get away with this, in other situations you will have some pen beforehand. And I do think that the pen item for her is pretty much most of the time Silver Branch Bow. That's because this item gives you physical pen just straight up without any other conditions. So with a mixed playstyle, you can kind of benefit from it both for your abilities and your basic attacks. And it also makes any stray shots that you can hit with your longer range projectiles just hit a fair bit harder every single time without you having to stack Executioner first, for example. And if you end up upgrading Death Toll into Death Temper and you activate your 3, you will overcap attack speed and you will make use of the passive as well. But again, the order depends on the game here. If you don't have that much gold, you can absolutely also switch that around a little bit. Go like this, for example, if that pen is needed earlier than the crit. Of course, sometimes you will run into very tanky groups of enemies and this may not be the best option. So you could, for example, look at Kin size and you could, for example, look at Executioner here if you want to go very heavily into pen and then probably upgrade that into the Ferocious Executioner as well. Well, I think there aren't really many wrong items on her. Like, for example, you could easily switch out the starter into something else and you would be fine. Or you could technically, for example, not go for Transcendence, go for Devils or something if that was more meta. I will say that I do think at the moment I would not recommend going into fully ability-based builds. Yeah, you have a decent one-shot combo potential, but there are some issues with people knowing how to counterplay it well, and then your one single combo is basically gone and you have nothing left in that moment except the, well, relatively laughable ability damage from your 2 and some basic attacks. So I would kind of stay away from that personally. I didn't find it nearly as effective as more crit-focused builds or builds with a little bit more attack speed. Also, a very interesting mechanic to be aware about when it comes to her 1 specifically is the possibility to cancel it. Because as of now, this is an instant cancel and you can use this to fire a lot of shots very quickly. And this works for any version of the 1. So basically, I'll just show you with the charged attack first. I can just use a 1 here and then I just right click and you'll see 2 damage numbers coming up. The moment I right click cancel, I get an additional normal basic attack that gets fired basically at the same time. And this can also be used with a spread shot. And if you time it properly, then you can basically cancel into the spread shot and then cancel out of it immediately. So you would go shot, spread shot, and immediately let go, and yeah, you see how quickly that was. It's basically 3 shots in the time frame where you'd otherwise do like slightly more than 1 or something. This also works with the long range version, but it makes a lot less sense to use it there because if you had this range where you can do this cancel combo, then you usually want to do it with the second version because it's extremely quick. But keep in mind, you're losing the extra damage that you would get from the 2. So if you're expecting an extended trade at close range, then you would want to stay in the spread shot form. You'll still get that one last cancel at the end, essentially, where you have the option to, like, at least almost double shot. So you're not going to miss out on that part. And the one where you cancel very quickly is more for a situation where someone is almost dead and you just need to get some very quick damage on them. I would recommend practicing this a little bit in jungle practice because all of this takes a fair bit of muscle memory to really get used to. I want to take the time here again to emphasize that Ishtar is not easy to play and in my opinion is very risky to play against enemies that know what they're doing. If they can counter your ultimate well and they cut off your path, your escape can't really be used properly. So I think she can initially have a very steep learning curve and can also kind of lead to a fairly frustrating experience. I won't discuss her balance here in detail, but I do think that you should at least be mentally prepared going into this. That'll be something that takes a little bit of practice to really get down properly. I hope the info that you have now will help you get ahead a little bit. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell for more info videos. I thank you very much for watching. SLOTH out.